Hey guys, what's going on? Steve Dispensa here with Tampa Real Estate Secrets. I hope you all rode out the storm nice and safe. We got very lucky with Hurricane Irma not doing all that much damage to the Tampa Bay area, but today's video is going to talk a little bit about what to do if you're buying a home and it gets damaged by a hurricane. I myself actually stayed safe through the storm. I stayed actually in a house that I just sold to some friends of mine in Lakeland, which of course got hit by the eye of the storm, but if riding out a hurricane with my clients isn't standing by my product, I don't quite know what is. But with that being said, I hope you guys all stayed safe. I hope you got your power back. Our first responders and linemen did an incredible job getting this city back up and running in a really short amount of time. We're all really grateful here for that. All right, so without further ado, let's talk a little about what happens if a home that you're buying winds up getting damaged while you're in contract, okay? So we start with what we call the maintenance requirement on the house. Now, this basically just says the seller is required to maintain the property in the same condition that it was in as of the effective date of the contract. So it just reads, except for ordinary wear and tear and casualty loss, and those repairs, replacements, or treatments required to be made by this contract, seller shall maintain the property, including but not limited to lawn, shrubbery, and pool, in the condition existing as of effective date. So at the end of the day, what this is saying is that the way the house was the day that you signed that contract, the effective date, that means that that house has to be delivered in the same condition or better when you take possession at closing. All right, this is why we do walkthroughs the day of closing and all that. So now that we know the seller is responsible for making the repairs after the storm, what happens, in this time frame? Because you could have a closing the day after Hurricane Irma hit, and something could have happened. So, the trouble with all this is that sometimes the necessary repairs take a lot longer than we anticipate. And you could be waiting weeks for contractors to get in there, and you have a closing scheduled in a number of days after a storm or one of these events hit. Now, there are clauses in the standard FAR bar contract that we use here in Tampa that do protect us in these situations, okay? So we have the force majeure clause, and what this basically says is, the buyer or seller shall not be required to perform any obligation under this contract or be liable to each other for damages so long as performance or non-performance of the obligation or the availability of services insurance is required. Approvals essential to closing is disrupted, delayed, caused, or prevented by force majeure. Force majeure means hurricanes, floods, extreme weather, earthquakes, fire, or other acts of God, unusual transportation delays or wars, insurrections, or acts of terrorism, which by exercise of reasonable diligent effort the non-performing party is unable in whole or in part to prevent or overcome. All time periods, including closing date, will be extended to a reasonable time up to 7 days after the force majeure no longer prevents performance under this contract, provided, however, if such force majeure continues to prevent performance under this contract more than 30 days beyond closing date, then either party may terminate this contract by delivering written notice to the other, and the deposit shall be refunded to buyer, thereby releasing buyer and seller from all further obligations under this contract. Okay. This is a whole bunch of legalese, and if you're in one of these situations, you really should actually bring a lawyer in. I know that attorneys sometimes have a bad reputation in regard to real estate closings. They tend to muck up the works a little bit, but when you do have an issue like this, it is good to make sure you're protective, especially if you have a substantial down payment being held in escrow and you want to make sure you protect that money. Definitely contact a lawyer. I am not an attorney, so this is just informational advice here, but if you're in one of these situations, that'd be a good idea to do. So the term force majeure comes from the French term that means greater force, which is just an event outside either party in the contract's control, such as a hurricane or a volcano erupting or an earthquake. And it's going to prevent either side from performing their duties. So let's say you were, in one example, okay, the Hurricane Irma comes and you had a house in contract that you were buying. And then all of a sudden, something like this happens. Not good. You've got a tree in your living room all of a sudden. So the problem is now, let's say that the closing was scheduled for 2 days after that tree fell. There's no way that damage is going to be repaired in time for your closing. So there's really two important parts to the force majeure clause, okay? The first part that states, all time periods, including closing date, will be extended a reasonable time up to 7 days after the force majeure no longer prevents performance under this contract. So this just means that any date on the original contract, whether it's the inspection period, the finance contingency date, or the closing date, it's going to be extended out a maximum of 7 days. So if you had a closing, let's say, and this tree fell and this repair has to get done, they immediately have 7 days after the tree falls, the hurricane's over, to get this done. to get this fixed up and restored to the condition it was in. That's a very tight time frame to get something done, especially following an event like a hurricane. The reason why this is... Okay. So this is a whole bunch of legalese. Highly recommend you contact a lawyer if you're in one of these situations. This is just some informational advice that I'm giving here. I am not an attorney, so definitely if you do have a house in contract that's damaged with a hurricane, you absolutely should at least get a consultation with an attorney to make sure that you're protected moving forward. Now, this whole term force majeure comes from the French term meaning a greater force, basically saying that an event occurs while your house is in contract that neither party could have prevented. Some giant act of God, a hurricane, a war breaks out, something that's going to prevent this closing from happening. So let's look at an example. Let's say you were buying a house right before Hurricane Irma hit. You were scheduled to close a few days after the storm, and a tree on the front lawn falls, just like this one. Okay, so now you've got a giant tree in your living room of the home you're supposed to be buying. This house is not in the condition that, you went into contract with, and the seller has to get this repair done. Now, they're either going to have to pay for that out of their own pocket, or hopefully their insurance is going to cover it. But the 7 days after the event that occurs, in this case being a hurricane, probably isn't enough time to get that tree, damage fixed. So all time periods in the contract states, including the closing date, are going to be extended for up to 7 days after the force majeure no longer prevents performance under this contract. So any date in that contract will automatically be extended when one of these events occurs up to 7 days. Now, in the case of a tree falling like this, what if there's widespread power outages? We can't get contractors in. There's nobody available. Massive damage. We look at some of the damage happening right now with Maria in Puerto Rico. The whole island is without power. What if that was Tampa, okay, and you just could not possibly get this house fixed up? This closing cannot happen. Well, there's a second part of the clause that says that if such force majeure continues to prevent performance under this contract more than 30 days beyond closing date, then either party may terminate this contract. Now, you may want to still buy this house. You may want to get this fixed. You may say, I don't care, I'm going to wait 3 months. And if that's the case, you have to negotiate a contract extension. But this protects you as a buyer that you're not going to lose your deposit, even if that house can't be fixed within 30 days after the event is over with, and it's still creating impacts. So you can obviously back out of that contract, okay, when that 30-day time period that it is still affecting it 30 days after your scheduled closing, and you as the buyer will get your deposit back. That's number one. Or your second option is that if both sides want to continue, have the realtors, your realtor, their realtor, negotiate a contract extension. And I would recommend at this point, this is something you may want to bring an attorney into, because it should very specifically state the damage that needs to be repaired and the time frame it needs to get done in. So this is one of those instances that I think, using a real estate lawyer, as this contract gets a little bit more complicated, you may want to have some very specific language inserted into those negotiations that I would definitely hire the services of an attorney to do. It's very easy for them to do it, and shouldn't cost you too much money, but it is going to protect you in the event that the other party doesn't comply. So those are the two big things that could happen if you are buying a house that's affected by a hurricane. If you're selling a house that's affected by the hurricane, it's pretty much the same information. Yes, you have to fix these things. If you still want to get the sale, done and taken care of, they have to be done in a certain time frame. 7 days after the event is over is the first extension, and then 30 days past the closing date if the event continues to be an issue. So this is in the case of widespread power outages, floods, things that even though the storm has passed, its effects are still preventing you from being able to close. So I know it's a lot of information to take in, but there's a ton of info that you need to know if you're buying a home, including this. So I recommend you guys check out my book, Tampa Home Buying Hacks. You can check it out on the link above. Just click on that and get your free copy today. I'll give you all the inside info from getting down payment assistance to how to shop for the best mortgage to all the little things to look for when buying your home. Okay, guys, that about wraps it up. I hope you all stayed safe during the recent hurricane. If you have any questions, feel free to call/text me 516-343-0052 or email me at stevedispensa@gmail.com. Thanks for checking out this video, and be sure to subscribe to Tampa Real Estate Secrets.